After 3.5 years of skating, I've landed quite a few tricks. I'm not a skate expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I have noticed that there is a single factor that determines whether or not I land a trick, and that's what I want to talk about. Luckily, the absolute best example that I have of this happened just last week. Last week, I landed my first stationary pressure flip, and then my second, and I was excited to say the least. I don't care if people think the pressure flips aren't hella cool. I think they're sick. I've always wanted to learn them. And this January, I actually started trying them, which is where this story starts, with months and months of having no idea what was happening. I watched a ton of tutorials and went out every couple weeks to practice them, giving them real solid tries, but I didn't seem to make any meaningful progress. I started out being able to get a decent flip while standing and do some sloppy no-comply versions, and I kept working on these, getting a rather consistent flip while standing and being able to do this kind of sloppy no-comply version, both while rolling and stationary, throwing in a few full attempts here and there. But I absolutely could not do this trick while jumping. Even after months and months, I still lost control when trying to do a full try. So this fall, I doubled down on the same thing, really working the flip and the stationary no-comply practice. As far as the no-comply practice went, I started to get much better at it, really focusing more on my foot positioning, my weight distribution, how my front foot left the board, and trying to keep my back foot down so that I could pinch the board against the ground instead of popping it. But I still couldn't even come close. Until last week, when I finally saw a very sudden change. Even though I started off doing mostly accidental shove-its, something was clicking, and while I don't normally hyperfixate on a single trick for a lunch break skate, for some reason I was ready to drill this flip into the ground. And while doing so, I finally started to feel three things. One, I could feel the edge of the deck scrape the ground. Two, I was finally keeping my back foot down long enough to scrape instead of pop. And three, I was starting to feel the timing of this trick. Three things that I was not able to do in any previous session. And as a bonus, I also learned how to do a stationary pop shove-it perfectly in place. Anyway, after 150 tries just on this day, I finally landed my first pressure flip. And then my second.
I cannot believe I landed those. I've been trying this trick for a year, almost. I started trying them January of this year. Now it's December. I've wanted them so badly. It felt so good. That is so exciting. Man, and two, not even one. The second one was way better.
But in typical skater fashion, I was not able to even come close to replicating this the next session I went out.
And this was the session after. Although I didn't make any new lands, I did come really, really close, and I had some really good attempts. And that I'm super satisfied with.
And on a side note, I've been practicing a lot of my tricks rolling recently, but I think I'm going to keep this one stationary just for a little bit longer. Maybe 10 tries or so, however long that takes, because what I'm really struggling with is keeping my back foot down to do a pressure flip instead of a pop. And personally, I don't want to move on to rolling practice until I can consistently keep that back foot down long enough to do a pressure flip and not a pop. But let's get into it. What gave me that land? Because it wasn't tutorials or even understanding the trick that guaranteed this land for me. It wasn't committing to my tries or a foot placement hack. All those help for sure, but there is one thing that ties them all together, and that's grit. It's determination, it's tenacity, being able to come back again and again and again despite the constant failure, being able to progress and regress in my practice methods. Grit got me through a whole year of failure. There's even some interesting studies and talks on grit. Professor Angela Lee Duckworth calls grit passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. And the only reason I bring this up is because the research resonated really deeply with me. And I think the talks are worth a listen because it's not just the pressure flip. If I look at all the tricks I can and cannot do, there is a clear line between the tricks that I've been determined to learn and the ones I've just played around with. The backside 180 improvement that I made this fall is also a perfect example of this. My determination to land a board slide or improve my kickflip, the fact that I'm willing to strength train on my off-skate days to skate better, it's grit. I personally think that grit is particularly important for beginner skaters because while some tricks and skills come very quickly and easily, others can take years and years of practice. And persevering for the long term is everything. Everyone's timeline is a little bit different when learning how to skate. Me, I'm still working on those basic tricks 3.5 years into skateboarding. But I've got a lot of grit, and I'm not going anywhere. But also, I'm just a random person on the internet chatting about their experiences and the conclusions that they've drawn at this point in time. And while I do think that there is value in talking about these topics, which is obviously why I've made this video, I also think that everyone's a little bit different. So, happy gritty skating, friends.